Michael Boyles, StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 226 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyles, StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. I'm your host, Anthony Renna, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's where I keep all my podcasts, as well as Strength Coach TV. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about some different threads from the forum, including, do coaches need to have played the game? Do injury rates affect team performance? And is anyone using the concurrent method of training anymore? For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Alan Cosgrove is on to discuss the 10,000 hour rule. For the Functional Movement System segment, Mike Perry is on to talk about implementing the FMS into your business. For our new segment on supplementation, the Superhuman Strength segment, Dom Mazzoni, co-founder of Superhuman Strength, is on today to discuss what the hell is NSF. It's a question they get a lot, and definitely one that's really important for strength and conditioning coaches to know. So that's coming up in a little while. For the Train Heroic, Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, today I have on Rob Assise. He's the track and field coach at Homewood Flossmoor High School. I spoke to Rob about his articles, Coaching Reflections, Avoiding Your Expert Phase, his article on teaching, and the death of football fast and track speed. We spoke about In Search of Transfer, that elusive transfer, and also his thoughts on the weight room for track and field athletes. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days. Just a buck, you'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. He's on every day, but we got him right here live in the flesh. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Hanging in there. Let's start out with an interesting, I think, coming from you. Do coaches need to have played the game? Mike Boyle, very famous hockey player in Boston. Mike, talk to us about this article. Do coaches need to have played the game? It's about the guy from the rugby union talking about he feels like they should.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting, and I think I love to throw up some topics just to see what people are thinking. What are their thought processes? Because I think, and I just commented on somebody who commented on our Twitter thread about it, and I said I think it is different for strength and conditioning coaches than it is for sport coaches. So I don't know necessarily if the strength and conditioning coach, I don't think that the sport coach needs to have played the game either. But I think the strength and conditioning coach definitely does not need to have played the game. And I actually, and you'll laugh at this, Anthony, guess what? I started writing an article about this, about great strength coaches who never played the game. Because if you look at like Mark and Shad working with the German national team, neither one of those guys was a soccer player. If you look at my friend Mike Wojcik, has more Super Bowl rings than anybody in the NFL, he was a field event thrower, shot put, discus guy at Boston College, never played football. So again, I've been able to be involved in national championships and Olympic medals in ice hockey, never played ice hockey. I was able to go work for the Red Sox, I played baseball if you count Little League up to 12. I guess I played baseball. And that's not years, that's age, 8 to 12. So, I think you look at that and think, I don't think so, but I just think it's also a really interesting dialogue. And I liked what the rugby guy, and I can't think of his name right now without looking at the thread, made some interesting points about people, having been in the locker room. And I think we brought this up before in terms of, do bad players make better coaches or do good players make better coaches? He said, there's kind of two schools of thought. That guy who was a great player a lot of times doesn't really understand how he does it and never really had to work at it, never really had to think about it. And the guy who struggled to make it has a different set of experiences going into coaching. I always, we talked about in our staff meeting the other day, everybody brings their baggage, whether they want to or not, they do. That can be good or bad depending on how you deal with the baggage. Okay, are you going to be one of those tyrant type coaches who's hard on everybody because you never made it yourself? Or are you going to be somebody who uses that experience to think about how to deal better with the elite players?
Yep. Mike, but I think too, which is going to sound kind of stupid, but I think with the strength and conditioning coach, especially if you just played a sport, because like you said, Wojcik was a thrower. I mean, he's been in the locker room. You've played sports, you played football kind of growing up, maybe not at an elite level, but I think just playing a sport for a strength and conditioning coach, which most strength and conditioning coach or fitness people kind of have done some, I bet the percentages, again, I don't have that number, but I guarantee you that there's a high percentage of strength coaches, not trainers, personal trainers, but strength coaches that have played a sport, have been in a locker room, at least into high school or college. I bet the number is pretty low.
I would think so, yeah. But as I said, I think it's interesting to sort of to ask the question and see what people's thoughts are kind of based on their situation. Do some people, because I don't really know, I start to think about it like Devin McConnell was a hockey player. Sean Skane wasn't a hockey player. Mike Potenza was a soccer player. So I think there's a lot of kind of, at least of the people that are kind of in my immediate circle, that did play a sport but didn't necessarily play that sport. And I think sometimes in certain sports it's harder because to find somebody when the field is new that did in fact play your sport might be harder or might have been harder than it would be, even if you think, Boyd Epley was a track guy at Nebraska. I said Mike Wojcik was a track guy. The people that probably embraced strength and conditioning earlier probably were not people in that particular sport, with the exception of football. And in football, what they tended to do was they hired the guy that liked to lift weights, and they just made him the strength coach because he liked to lift weights. So I guess it's as I said, some of the stuff I've been trying to post, I think I'm looking more at the thought stimulating idea. Okay, are we getting people to think a little bit and maybe think a little bit out of their personal comfort zone?
Yeah, absolutely. Another one is kind of on the same, kind of a similar topic about the profession was, do injury rates affect team performance? It was a blog by a guy named Mick Hughes. Tell us a little bit about this article and your thoughts on your injury rates.
And yeah, I guess that would be almost like you said, almost the exact same thing. I read these things and then I think, hey, I want everybody else to read these things. And then I'd be interested to see what everybody else thinks, because I feel like there are some coaches, when coaches, strength coaches particularly, are not having good luck with injury rates, they like to say that strength and conditioning doesn't affect injury rates. And when they are having good success with injury rates, they like to think that good strength and conditioning does affect injury rates. I really firmly, positively believe that good strength and conditioning does absolutely, positively impact injury rates. And I know that there are people, I think it was Bob Alejo might have disagreed with it one time, but I just know experientially myself, and I knew this with the Bruins. When I started with the Bruins, if you looked it up, my first year, which I think might have been like 90, 91, we set the record for man games lost. We had the modern day record, and it was like in the 600s. We used 50 players during that season. But we had no preseason. We had no program. We had nothing. And every year, we literally creeped our way down from 500 to the last 2 years that I was there. I remember, I think we were second to Ottawa in games lost. We were in the low hundreds, like 120 or something like that. And I think Sean Skane still, there's a site, Man Games Lost. I don't know how far back it goes, but some of that data is still up there. And there was no question that we saw the more guys we could get to work out during the course of the season, the more consistent we were, the more workouts. If we just simply log the number of workouts that we got in, because think about this now, in the 90s, it was really very, it was kind of optional in a sense for us. The younger guys, it was mandatory because it was easy to tell the younger guys they had to do it. But we had some veteran guys. I had guys that were my age. I had Ray Bork and Dave Ellett and guys like that who were literally the same age that I was. And some of those guys, they weren't into lifting. They didn't want to lift during the season. And you were sort of like, okay, that's why I used to make, we used to make up the rules as we went along. And one of the rules I made up was that if you were over 30, you could do whatever you wanted. If you were under 30, you had to be on the program, because that allowed us to sort of have this cutoff where our older veteran guys who really didn't like the weight room were above that number. And if we'd had a guy that was 29 who had been above that number, I would have said, if you're over 29 or under 29, you don't have to do it. You know, it's sort of, you just kind of make it up as you go along to try to make it fit where you want to be. But we saw the more of those workouts we got in, the lower our injury rate got. I saw it with our women's Olympic team when we did it. I saw it at BU. We had it was rare for us to have a guy miss a game at BU. It really was. I mean, we'd have maybe the occasional, separated shoulder from a big collision. We had a very small number of concussions, the occasional MCL strain, but we'd go years at a time sometimes without a really significant injury. And I have to believe that had to do with the way that we trained, the way and the consistency. I think the consistency matters, and I do believe that the way you train matters, because it was interesting. And I won't say the school, but I had a kid one time. I had another strength coach who had a real rash of ACL injuries with his football program and was sort of saying to me, I don't understand it. And I remember saying to him, do your guys do one-leg squats? And he was like, oh, yeah, we do one-leg squats all the time. I said, it's really weird because I feel like that's a really great preventative injury, and I really feel like that would drive the numbers down. And then I got one of his guys to train for the combine the next, after that season, and I asked him to do a one-leg squat, and he looked at me like I had two heads. And I said, you guys do them all the time? And he was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. We never do these. And what I realized was that some guys sort of get in cover your ass mode and like, oh, yeah, we do that. We do that all the time. Yeah. And then you realize that in point of fact, they don't. So I think that's why I used to like the quote, what people say and what people do sometimes are entirely different. And it will surprise you when you get inside and look and think, hey, these guys are doing nothing but sort of bilateral, typical football training, clean from the floor, double leg squat, RDL. And then they're wondering why they're having a knee injury problem when they're not addressing some of the unilateral stuff. So I guess it's another one of those thought posts.
Mike, but if you thought about it though, I mean, if you looked at your program from the Bruins right now, would you kind of be like, holy cow, I don't know how we didn't get hurt, I don't know how these guys, how we improved our man games. Would you look at it like that, or would you still look at it and feel like, no, it was a good program? Not for the time being. Would you look at it right now and say, that's a pretty solid program?
I would, because I have. And it's interesting because I can remember our big in-season lift was one-leg squat because, again, guys were very weight averse. They didn't want to lift weights. They didn't want to do heavy squats. So we did, hey, just bang out a couple sets of one-leg squats for me. We did chin-ups. We did bench presses. It was still the same basic program that we did. I would say sometimes I look at the ab stuff, we probably were doing incline sit-ups or something and some foolishness like that, crunches, who knows what we were doing from an ab standpoint. But I still think it was a basic, balanced program. And I can go back and look, we were doing unilateral stuff probably in the 80s before I even went to the Bruins. And it might have been a little more step-up oriented at that time versus one-leg squats, but I can remember it distinctly when it happened. I had one of my friends that used to train with me who was a nationally ranked Olympic weightlifter. And he helped me out filming a video, one of the very first VHS tapes that I made, so you can imagine how long ago that was. And one of the things, he was a 500 squatter, weighed about 180 pounds, and I asked him to do step-ups. And I remember I think we put 135 on the bar for step-ups, thinking he could demo that pretty easy. And he couldn't do a step-up with 135. I remember we had to strip the 45s off and go back to 25s and do step-ups with 95 pounds. And I remember that time thinking in my mind, wow, the difference between this guy who does almost exclusively bilateral training and the athletes I'm training that are doing some unilateral stuff is really significant. And that stuck in my head. It sticks in my head to this day, of realizing that there was a real kind of specificity of training effect that I wanted. And it was more probably, I don't even know if at that time I had really thought through the injury prevention part of it as much as I might have thought through the kind of you only run on one leg at a time part of it. And so, but it still was there. And as I said, that was probably late 80s.
All right, good stuff. Wow. Coach, let's tie a bow on this power stuff. Rudy Thomas was back on the forum talking about the post was, does anyone use a concurrent system anymore? It was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, like he said, but our last conversation had gotten him thinking about, all he sees on social media is dynamic effort work, and that, where days of pure power work or phases of pure power work. Can you just talk, he wanted to know, is there still room for PAP or contrast and complex training? Do we need French contrast or Italian contrast, as he said too? Jumping on my idea. Coach, talk to us about this thread.
Well, I've become a huge proponent of Irish contrast training where you alternate drinking and lifting at the same time. But and so I will take credit for inventing that in case anybody wants to mention it. But yeah, one, it was good to see Rudy back on, which was cool. And two, I thought, again, I like these questions that aren't necessarily aimed at me. Like, he knows my answer. He knows what we do. But I think he's looking more to stimulate some thought on the forum and to ask some people. Because I just did a little half-hour session like this for some trainers at Vasa out in Utah today. And one of the things that, we talked about, which we always talk about, is this sort of beware of the internet. Because what you see, and it goes back to that same thing, what people say and what people do and what people say they do are not always the same things, in terms of you've got to be able to, to look at this stuff. And I still can't believe that we have people that are following like a West Side template in this day and age. But there are still people out there that have this real, powerlifting orientation, and they have like a dynamic day. And it just fascinates me that we haven't gotten beyond that, but we haven't. And I guess when sometimes I'd look at the dynamic stuff and I think, do we really need to do that if we're doing cleans and we're doing plyos and we're doing, do we need this? But in some ways I've come full circle, because I look at it and think we're doing, and I don't know if I'd call it a dynamic effort day, because the loads are significantly lower. I feel like what is representative of that dynamic effort day is taking a relatively heavy load and trying to move it fast. And by relatively heavy, I mean it might be in the 50-60% of max range. But those are still heavy. If you're strong, that's a heavy load. It's a heavy weight. And I just have always, because I tried it. This is one of the things I say to people. It's not like I don't try this stuff. I tried the West Side stuff. Again, I would go probably 90s, 95, 96, 97. I bought chains. I mean, I literally had to go to a boating place to get chains that they used to tie up really heavy boats, because it wasn't like it now where you could get them. And we made our own, ways to attach them to the bar and double them over and do all this stuff. And I just didn't see the sort of inherent value of trying to move a heavy weight fast. I just felt like, wow, this is kind of dangerous. Like, I don't really like, and what we found was that it was really difficult to try to get somebody to think about a slow eccentric and a fast concentric. They just wanted to do it as fast as they could. And I never felt good about joints. I never felt good about back, shoulders when we were trying to do that stuff. So we tended to shy away from it. But that was why we went, when I remember seeing, and again, this goes back, going down and seeing Mark Verstegen at IMG Academy, IPI, again, 90s probably, and seeing the med ball wall and realizing that, okay, they're doing their kind of high velocity work with med balls off of this big, huge, he had a concrete wall that he'd probably know the actual dimensions, but I'm going to tell you that this wall that they had built in the middle of their bubble, or at one end actually of their bubble, was probably 20 feet high and 40 feet long for them just to do med ball stuff against. And I remember thinking, now this makes sense. This is the way to get this velocity specific stuff that I want without trying to move heavy weights fast in the conventional power lifts, which is really what the West Side thing is doing. And, people think, oh, you're anti-West Side. No, I think, Louis Simmons is a really smart guy. He's done some really cool stuff, but it's for powerlifters. And so I think we have to look at that and think from an athlete perspective. How do we translate that thought process of what's in between sprinting at 10 meters a second and lifting at less than 1 meter per second? And how do we address that really big void? You start thinking about, there's a void in there of 9 meters per second, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's interesting just because of the where this has gone. And like you talked about last time with the velocity-based training and people talking about different ways of power. We've definitely seen this kind of a little bit of move. I've seen it anyway from Olympic lifting, right? I mean, obviously it's still there, but we've seen people kind of tend to move a little bit away from it. I think part of it is people don't want to coach it, right? And then, part of it is I think people have moved away where they feel like there's some quicker, better ways to kind of get people power.
Right. But I also think that's because I think they're both the same reason. And what I've found, and I said that almost invariably, when you'll find the people who say they are anti-Olympic weightlifting, they can't teach Olympic weightlifting. And maybe people would say I was generalizing, but I don't believe that to be true, because I do think my thing is, what do you do with people, and I've talked about this, what do you do with your older people, your injured people who don't tolerate Olympic weightlifting well anymore? And that's where we started playing around. Or even, like I said, for me, it was my baseball pitchers when I started looking and saying, all right, what am I going to do? Is there something, again, in that bridge to velocity that we're looking at between jumping and throwing med balls? And that's kind of the videos that I posted, a month ago, Craig Breslow and Rich and those guys jumping, trap bar jumps and dumbbell jumps and some of that stuff. And I think it's not as much, and that's where you get into kind of the French contrast, the Irish contrast, the Italian contrast, the Romanian contrast training, where I do think there may be some things in terms of, okay, we're going to do a strength exercise, and then maybe we're going to do a power exercise that is somewhere a little bit more in between, but probably in my case, trending towards the lighter load side. And then there is that body weight thing. So maybe even if it's not like, and I don't know, like French contrast, I think, I don't know, does it have to be 4? I tried to read through the article, and I actually looked it up and read about it because I felt like, wow, what exactly is French contrast, and why, in fact, is it French as opposed to anything else? But I do kind of like the idea of saying maybe there is this sort of decreasing curve of load, where the load, because in French contrast, the load actually ends up becoming less than body weight. So, they're doing assisted jumps with bands and things like that. And just some of that stuff I don't like for, again, you get into safety reasons. And I always think with us, there's like the mass production idea of, I can't have kids jumping in my power racks with bands. I can't have people doing that in my facility anyway, because it's just it's just like a license for something to go bad.
Yeah.
So it's, but yet I do think we might move to more of a, like a 3, like a tri-set kind of thing in terms of split squat, explosive step up, and then maybe like a single leg jump on the shuttle where we can work with less than body weight. I think we could be looking at doing some of that stuff in the future. So
yeah, good stuff. Obviously the experimentation continues and the discussion will continue. So good stuff. Coach, that'll conclude the Strength Coach podcast portion. So we're going to stay on and do some more questions, but thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me. And I apologize for being a couple minutes late.
All right, right now at Perform Better, select items are 30% off the already low prices, so big savings right now at Perform Better. The next one-day seminar is in Boston on March 17th, St. Patty's Day. Spend your St. Patty's Day with Lee Burton, Eric Cressy, Dan John, and Mike Boyle. Want to see what's going to happen that night after the seminar. And remember, Perform Better has financing. They do such a great job with the facility design stuff, and I know it could be expensive, but they do offer financing. They're not a lender, but they've partnered with leading finance companies in the marketplace to provide you with competitive rates. You can check it out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars.
Hey guys, this is Alan Cosgrove, and this is the Business of Fitness segment here on the Strength Coach podcast. This episode is brought to you by ResultsFitnessMentorship.com. Please go over there and check it out. We've got a course coming up soon. This episode, I want to talk about the 10,000 hour rule. This has been on the Strength Coach forum many times, and it's a somewhat controversial subject mentioned in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, and it's based on a study by someone else. And the basic premise of the 10,000 hour rule is that greatness or high level skill requires a big time investment. Now, I don't think it was ever supposed to be a hard and fast rule, but the idea was that mastery did not come from this innate genius or innate ability, but actually came from hard work and effort. And the number came from the idea that 20 hours of deliberate practice per week, that's 1,000 hours a year, for about 10 years, seemed to be some sort of tipping point or a minimal time investment before that mastery seemed to appear. Now, this has been debated a bunch of times. I'm not going to argue whether the number is correct or not, and I'm not going to debate whether innate genius exists or not. But I think it'd be impossible to disagree with the idea that 20 hours a week of dedicated study and practice is going to make you better, like it's going to pay off. I think that's fairly clear. Where I think that the rule has been misinterpreted has been what deliberate practice is. So if you're a trainer training the same group of clients for 40 hours a week for 5 years, yeah, you've put in 10,000 hours of work, but that's not what dedicated practice or study is. You don't magically become world class just by putting the hours in. You're not an expert trainer just because you've had a full-time job for 4 years, right? So I think it's more than just being at work. It has to be curriculum-based with outcomes, probably under a coach or instructor to give feedback and correction. The Erickson, who actually came up with the study, his definition of deliberate practice was a scientific attention to specific improvement goals, a constant drive to move outside one's comfort zone that is generally not enjoyable, and a good coach to minimize the risk of wasted, frustrated time. Which actually brings me to my next point, because I get asked a lot by young coaches about how to grow their Facebook followers or their Instagram followers. And I'm all for understanding marketing, but what happened to just becoming really good at your craft? Putting in another 10, 20 hours a week, studying the actual skill set that will make you stand out, that will deliver better results to your clients, that will improve your communication skills with your clients, your coaching skills, your program design, the energy that you bring to your clients, that stuff that will make you so good that people just can't ignore you. That's where the marketing begins. So chasing social media followers isn't the path to greatness. That's not a scorecard of your abilities. It may be an interesting side effect of becoming really good and well known, but it should never be the target or your goal. Becoming world class takes more than time though. It's more than just the hours you put in. It's what you put into those hours. So I think the 10,000 hour rule is true, but the part about deliberate practice has been confused a little bit. So give yourself a commitment of an hour or two a day of actual study, right? Of actual, not just reading books or randomly taking certification, like a path to master something you're looking for, a path to master business or to master program design or to master coaching cues or speed or something, like an actual curriculum where you're following and growing in a certain direction. Remember, it's more than the hours you put in, it's what you put into those hours. That's it for this week, guys. This was Alan Cosgrove. This is the Strength Coach Podcast, Business of Fitness segment. That was the 10,000 hour rule, brought to you by ResultsFitnessMentorship.com.
Welcome to the Functional Movement System segment. My name is Mike Perry, and today I'm going to start a two-part series on how you can implement the FMS into your business. For part one, I'm going to talk about how you can use the FMS as a sales tool. So let's say that you've captured a lead, whether it's online or on the phone. The next logical step is to bring them into your facility for a strategy session or a consultation. You'll give them a tour of your facility, a brief overview of your equipment, where everything is, and you will probably answer any initial questions that they have. From there, you're most likely going to sit down and get to know your potential client. You can ask them questions about their training history, injury history, aches and pains, likes, dislikes, hobbies, leisure activities, family, and work. Essentially, you're going to have a conversation with them and spend a few minutes listening and developing a rapport. Now is the perfect time to introduce the FMS. Give them a brief overview of the screen and why you use it. It's important that you use layman's terms when discussing the screen with potential clients. I say something like, the goal of the screen is to find your movement baseline. We're going to look at basic movements like shoulder mobility, how you squat, how you lunge, etc. We just want to see how you currently move without adding any weights into the picture. We want to see how well you can control your body and space. Listen, most people don't have any clue what an active straight leg raise is. They don't understand rotary stability, trunk stability, or an inline lunge, so it's important to keep it simple. Now, at this point, you're probably maybe a half hour into the session. You've taken the time to listen to them. You've learned more about them, their work, their family, their background, etc. They've also experienced the FMS, which is something they have never seen before. Right there, you're going to give them an experience that they've never had, or most likely they haven't had, and hopefully they understand that you really focus on attention to detail and you really want the best for your clients. Now, depending on time and depending on how skilled you are from a corrective exercise standpoint, the next part of your sales strategy would be to apply a certain type of corrective. Now, if you're not comfortable nailing correctives or you just don't feel like you have the skill set, I don't recommend doing this as part of your strategy. But let's say that you do have the experience and you are pretty familiar with any types of correctives. You can pick one of the 7 movement patterns that need improvement. You could quickly rescreen it, give them some simple metrics, whether it's a measurement, etc. Then you apply your corrective strategy and then rescreen. Hopefully you've been successful and you've improved their movement pattern in some way, shape, or form. So at this point, you've given them information, you've rescreened them, and they have improved their movement pattern. Right there, you've shown that you can give them some success in their training within 5 to 10 minutes. Now imagine what you could provide to them in 4 to 6 weeks. Remember, the goal during this initial visit is to make the experience memorable. You've taken the time to listen, you've learned more about them, and you've also introduced the movement screen. I can guarantee you they probably have never had an experience like this. In my next session, we're going to talk about how you can use the FMS in a team training environment. We had the opportunity to work with a rowing team, and we had 60 athletes. We used the screen to identify trends, and then we took that information, applied correctives, and we had a fantastic outcome with their training program. That's it for today. My name is Mike Perry, and this has been the Functional Movement System segment. For more information, check out functionalmovement.com.
Hey, welcome to the Superhuman Strength segment. My name's Dom Mazzoni, and I am co-founder of Superhuman Strength, and I am really in a good position because I get to work with some of the best strength coaches around, athletes, coaches, manufacturers. And so I have a really great baseline for providing people information on supplements and what's real and what's not out there in the world. Today, we are going to have a ton of fun because we're going to answer a question that's asked all the time. What the hell is NSF? And we get this question a lot. So when you start talking to coaches and athletes in any sport that is above just, straight recreational, you start hearing about NSF. And NSF is one of the most recognized testing, inspection, and certification organizations around. I mean, these guys do everything from toilets and plumbing components to drinking water and personal care products. NSF are the folks that are doing all the testing and certifying for safety. But when it comes to any type of nutraceutical or dietary supplement, NSF certified for sport is pretty much the final word for professional sports. All the big boys have jumped on the NSF wagon, including Major League Baseball, National Hockey, CFL. They're all have only basically told their people you're only permitted to provide and recommend NSF sports. But it also is recommended by the NFL, PGA, LPGA, CCES, CPSDA, and all kinds of other acronyms that you wouldn't know unless you're directly involved in those sports. But needless to say, they are the final word when it comes to certifying sport supplement products. So what the heck do these guys at NSF do to make all these organizations jump on board to say that anything they've tested is safe for athletes to ingest? Well, several things, actually. So number one, they make sure these products don't contain any of the 270 plus substances that are banned by major athletic organizations. Number two, the contents of the supplement actually match what is printed on the label. That's a really big deal, and we're going to talk about that in a further segment. Number 3, there's no unsafe levels of contaminants. And number 4, the product's manufactured at a facility that is GMP registered and audited twice annually for quality and safety by NSF. So the question everyone should be asking is how? How the heck do these guys do this? Do they just look at something and say, okay, you're approved? Well, I wish it was that easy because, for an example, let's take superhuman strength recovery, our recovery formula. Once we came up with that formulation and wanted it NSF certified for sport, we had to send NSF our product labels. Well, these wizards go through this and make sure that nothing in there is going to end up turning you into a mutant or make your genitals and private parts shrink. In other words, no banned substances. Next, out of every single batch of superhuman strength recovery, we actually have to send a sealed container that any consumer could pick up. And that's sent over to NSF, and a bunch of lab technicians crack it open and literally tear it apart to ensure nothing in there is banned. Nothing in there is contaminated. And here's the big one. What's actually inside the bottle matches what's on the label. So you might not think that's a really big deal, but again, I mentioned in further segments, we're going to talk about that. And there's a real issue out there of what is on the label doesn't match what's inside. So NSF is really all about safety, but also what you see is what you get. And it's extremely expensive to become NSF certified. And our recovery formula and our superhuman strength restore hydration formula and our upcoming chocolate vegan recovery, they're all NSF. And yes, the bill is going to be extremely painful, but everyone's going to know that our products are absolutely positively clean. And that is what NSF is all about. So if you have a choice between a brand that's NSF and not, you definitely know that the NSF products are the ones you can really trust because they're the only ones that are actually tested. I want everyone to listen really loud and clear when I say this. Anybody can get a product manufactured and get it on the shelf. That does not mean that it's third-party tested at all. Our organizations like the FDA and Health Canada and these North American organizations, they do not test. So that's important. And listen, I'm really proud, lastly, all of our products are produced in an NSF certified facility. So in the end, we know that facility is using the same stringent guidelines to produce all our products. And that only, makes our customers happy, but it also makes us feel great about it too. So if you're looking at the store and you see NSF or you see something right next to it that's not, now you know what NSF means, and you, of course, can make the choice. Well, listen, that's it for today. For more information about Superhuman Strength, check us out, superhumanstrength.com. Put the code STRENGTHCOACH in for a 10% discount on your first order. So happy to do this and can't wait to talk to you all next week.
All right, have you signed up for your free trial at Train Heroic? Guys, you need to get on board with this, get another revenue stream, add some value to your current clients, and make your programming much more efficient. I'm loving the simplicity of Train Heroic. They've added some readiness surveys as well. And I've tried different online training software, and this is the most user-friendly I've come across. Not only for me, from my perspective of programming, but also for my clients. It's a super user-friendly app that they have that your clients use. Support's amazing. They ramp you up really quick. So as soon as you sign up, they send you an email for a call. Make sure you do that. They go over everything you need to know. If you don't get it, they'll do another call. But head over to Train Heroic, guys. It's free. It's a 14-day trial. You got nothing to lose. Let them know I sent you. If you love it, and I know you will, you can sign up for the Pro Edition. They'll give you 25% off your first year. Again, make sure you tell them I sent you. All right, now time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach. And today I have on Rob Assise, and he is a 15-year veteran of teaching mathematics. He also has been coaching track and field at Homewood Flossmoor High School. He's had experience coaching football as well as cross country. And he's been doing a lot of writing on Simply Faster, Just Fly Sports, and the ITCCCA. We've recently had some of his contributions over on strengthcoach.com. So, Coach, thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, wanted to kind of start out with some of the coaching ideas. You wrote an excellent article on called "Coaching Reflections: Avoiding Your Expert Phase," which was, I think this obviously has to be something written by an experienced coach. So, because I think a lot of people, this happens to a lot of coaches with like what you were talking about. You're able to motivate athletes and kind of provide an atmosphere for them to thrive. And, you had pretty much success. And I think a lot of times, we get complacent because we've had this success. So talk to us about this article.
I think complacency is exactly the word that comes to mind when I think of it. This is maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where I was just like, I know enough, and there's not much. I can continue to have success, but I think ultimately I was just looking for new things in the wrong places. So I eventually came across some content that I thought was interesting, and then that just kind of snowballed into other things. And it's really gets back to that idea that the more you end up knowing, the less you realize you know. And that article in particular was just me kind of reflecting and being sort of critical of myself for getting into that sort of area of complacency. And now I realize that there's just so much to know out there, and you can always grow as a coach and learn new ways to motivate athletes and identify with athletes. And then obviously, just the nuts and bolts of training, there's certainly areas that I now recognize that I definitely need to invest some more time in.
Yeah. And I think what ends up happening, and I think you mentioned this somewhere, I'm not really sure where, was, we end up kind of following that same, for example, the same coaches, or we kind of get in this bubble. Charlie Weingroff had a good point recently. He said, when was the last time you went to a conference or a workshop where you didn't know anybody? Where you're just going to go and do your own thing and get out of the comfort zone. Because, and again, there's nothing wrong with Perform Better stuff, for me, but I'm still going to go to them every year. But I have to get away from them sometimes as well, because sometimes you see a lot of the same, people, the base is on the same circuit. And, you kind of have to find those things outside your comfort zone. I think that's why Coach Boyle really has taken to some of your stuff and Tony Holler's stuff, is because it was out of, it was a different viewpoint, but still coming from a good place.
Yeah, absolutely. I find myself intentionally picking up things now that in reading or watching or whatever that I know that I could possibly disagree with, or that I just haven't been exposed to before. And it's just it's fun to take those other ideas and figure out how they can be implemented into the things that you're already doing.
Yeah. Can you explain the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Sure. So it's, to me, it just is, you get to a point where you think you kind of know everything, and but the reality is you really don't. Within that article, I have that little graph that I think explains it pretty well, where you think you're an expert, but you're truly you're not. And as you move on in time, you realize that you don't really know as much as you thought as you did, and eventually, ideally, you can get to be an expert at some point.
Yeah, I guess if you keep going. But it's so funny. I'm writing a book on success, and basically interviews with really close to 50 of the top fitness professionals in different areas. And what you find is all of these folks just don't feel like they're a success yet, because they're always on this journey of getting better. Can you talk to me about, I like this idea, what you were talking about with some of these coaches feeling like, okay, but this is the way we always did it. Talk to us about what the better response would be.
Yeah, I think people, like we were saying earlier, you just get kind of stuck into what you've done in years past. But I think we should always be looking for a better way. So if we say this is what we have done in the past, how can we make it better? Would be, I think, a more appropriate response. Just because I think there is an optimal way. We may never really know what that true optimal way is, but we have to strive to get there.
Yeah, I've been just finished The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, and he has a good saying similar to what you just said. Is like, okay, what worked well? So they answer that question, but then they say, and I think this is a good way to approach it. It would be even better if. So it kind of leaves you open for creativity without feeling like you're being so critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like a good way to view it. I can't wait to get into that one. That's definitely on my list. Talent Code was one of my favorite books of all time.
Yeah, you'll really appreciate this because as a coach and as a teacher, it's creating these environments that create better teams. Really important book for all of us coaching. And what I like to, too, and you said in that article, just because you've produced athletes who have improved and had success, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've achieved optimal improvement and success for those athletes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we find this at the high school level in particular. Like I talk with my colleagues all the time. We can kind of do anything with our athletes, and they're going to get better.
Yeah.
They're at such a low training age. So, like, if the vast majority of your athletes aren't improving as a high school coach, like, you got to be kind of stupid, like you got to be doing some really stupid things. So it just, I think the idea of, like, you can continue to do these kind of crazy or stupid things, and a lot of the teenager will respond positively to it because they're going to be faced with a stimulus. They'll adapt to that stimulus, and then the next time they'll be able to face it or deal with it better. So it kind of just gives you that sort of false sense that you're doing the right thing when you really might not be doing the right thing. And like I said, we got to try to find that optimal way. And again, those, like, the clientele that we deal with, I often say we're training kids that are, like, doing arithmetic and versus calculus. Like, we have that wide range, but the bottom line is all of them are at an age where they're just going to get better by becoming an adult for the most part, and we just have to find the appropriate things to do with them to foster that growth and make it the best that it can possibly be. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you think, I mean, you mentioned in this some of the coaches that you have a problem with, feel like, okay, they want them in their program, they would be performing at a higher level, but also this idea that they discourage them to participate in other sports. I was really feeling like that was more of a parents thing. Is that happening a lot with some of the coaches?
I think it certainly varies from school to school, from program to program. I feel like we're at a point as a whole where it's kind of like there was maybe 10 years ago, I feel like there was a wave of, at least within this area of specialization, we saw that more and more, but now we're kind of coming back around more to, like, multiple sports are good for high school athletes. And then I can't speak too much about it in terms of the youth setting, but just from what I'm seeing, within this area, it seems like the idea of multiple sports is getting promoted a little bit more. So I hope it continues in that direction. I think there's a lot of data out there that supports it.
Yeah, I mean, Coach Boyle's always talking about that, and just kind of going on. In our bubble, we keep talking about it, about that how important it really is, and try to bring up examples all the time of really just how many of these professional athletes did play multiple sports, and it helped in their development. There's certainly, like you said, plenty of research to prove that that works. Coach, you got a different perspective because you've been teaching as well. I think there's definitely, we had Mark Watts on here, and he's been a teacher as well. He's actually teaching, I think, fifth graders right now. which is really interesting. Talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned, give us the story of playing jigsaw puzzles and how that became an epiphany for you.
Yeah. So my daughter is really into doing puzzles. And when we sit down to do one, just the process that she goes through to complete the puzzles is totally different than what I would do. She starts, like a lot of them are like princess puzzles. So she starts with faces and kind of works her way out. Whereas I would, start on the edges and in the corners and then kind of work my way in. So it's just really cool to, when you just sit back and watch, especially like now, I mean, she's our first, so that she's 3 years old, just to see how she's kind of taking in the world and kind of trying to make sense of it herself is cool. I think oftentimes as teachers, parents, coaches, we don't let things just develop and kind of let kids figure things out on their own. We kind of get into a mode where we're just telling them how to do things. So it's fun just to kind of sit back and see how they reason their way through the world,
Yeah, was it like you were talking about, it's hard for you not to be like, well, if you did it this way, right? And I think we have a hard time as coaches with the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There has to be a balance there, right? So like when she's doing the puzzle and she starts to get like frustrated, where I think that she's going to just say, you know what, I'm done with it, then maybe I'll intervene. And I think it's similar with an athlete where you may give them an instruction or a corrective type thing in terms of technique, and you got to let them roll with that for a little while and see if they can kind of figure it out. And then if they get to a point where they're getting incredibly frustrated again, then it might be time to talk to them again. But I think, we just can't, like I often say with coaching track, like the last thing I want my jumpers in particular to be is a feedback junkie. Like they need to have me talk to them after every single attempt or every single rep. Like I want them to reason their way through it and become an independent problem solver. So yeah, it's just that balance of, when are they going to get so frustrated that they're going to shut down? If I can intervene, then I will. But otherwise, like if we can provide the tools for them to figure things out on their own, then that would certainly be the ideal.
Yeah, and I liked how you finished this article, and it leads into it. It's, you had the John Wooden quote. I learned to focus on studying people, especially young people. I study the way they react, the way they are motivated, the way they are frustrated, and the way they work. This will help me discover the way they learn, and when I discover that, I'm halfway there. You feel like the other half, though, is kind of what you were just talking about. The best way for the teacher is determining the best way for the teacher to become obsolete.
Right, absolutely. I think, and I see it because every year I'm dealing with experienced athletes that we've had, in the program for 3 or 4 years, and then there's always an influx of new guys. So it's fun to really watch their growth over time, where like I'm at a point now with a lot of my upperclassmen where I don't really say anything to them during the course of a competition, and it's great. And if I do ask them, I'll ask them a question. They give me the feedback that I would give them in terms of instruction. If you could get to that point, life is good. And the other cool part about that too is then they can be helpful in terms of teaching the younger guys as well.
So how do you approach that though? So if you see something, let's say you saw something and oh man, he moved his leg the wrong way, whatever. And then you want to tell them, how do you approach that though? Do you try to just go ask them the question? Like, what did you feel in that? What did you think? Did you feel like you did everything right or wrong, or what? How do you approach it?
Yeah. How did that feel is one of my go-tos. And oftentimes they'll describe, they tend to have a pretty good awareness of what went down. At least the experienced ones do. So that's usually a go-to question for me. And then if it's kind of not leading to where I want it to go, then we'll just kind of break things down further. Like, what did you feel in this part? What did you feel here? What did you feel here? And if we have video, we'll go through that too. But I want them to drive the conversation and see if they can get to what I was seeing. Sometimes though, I'll see it in real time, and then we're looking through it, in frame by frame, and we'll see something else that might even be more important. So, but ultimately, just have them drive the conversation is the best thing that I think we can do.
Yeah, nice approach. Cool. All right, I want to move on to a little bit of speed. And you were talking about, there was an article you wrote, The Death of Football Fast and Track Speed. And what's interesting is, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but with the Daniel Coyle book, the Culture Code book, he was talking about sometimes using catchphrases, and I know these aren't really catchphrases, but sometimes, and you explain it in the article that, what is football fast or what is track speed, but sometimes using catchphrases, as long as people truly understand what they mean, can be really helpful. But you'd like to see them those phrases taken out. But I want to go over your pyramid that you talked about, just to kind of basically, in order to categorize these different types of locomotion, of biped motion. Can you go start with the bottom of the pyramid in linear speed?
Yeah. So linear speed, I said, as the foundation. I think moving at your top end speed is something that's incredibly unique. I don't think there's really anything like moving at max velocity in terms of the coordination, rhythm, and timing that it takes to move really, really fast. And there's just unique global training effects, I think, within linear speed.
Well, one question on that. I mean, you feel like, and we had Cameron Joss on here last episode, and just talking about those different vertical and horizontal forces, and you feel like that not only maybe a 2-for-1 deal, but maybe a 10-for-1 deal, because they have to work through that acceleration piece to attain the max velocity piece.
Right, absolutely. So that's one thing I often say is, if you're working top end speed, you're also working acceleration. But when you're working top end speed, I've written about it in some other articles too. You're improving repeat sprint ability, which a lot of people view as just let's do some gassers, let's some wind sprints, things like that to improve repeat sprint ability. But if you're going to raise the ceiling of your linear speed, everything else that's submax is going to come with it. I think you're improving your strength, because when you're moving as fast as possible, you're putting an extreme amount of force in the ground in a little amount of time. There's just a ton of benefits that come with training linear speed. And I think that's, if there's one thing that I think like guys like myself and Tony Holler are on a crusade to do, is just to get more people to sprint, like truly sprint, be fresh and sprint, anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week.
Yeah, we had Coach Holler on here and talking all about that. It definitely changed some of the way a lot of coaches are thinking. I think we had a big impact last year on not only Coach Boyle's work, but a lot of other coaches as well. Good stuff. Curvilinear speed. I found this really interesting. I never really trained those kind of athletes. I was more in the golfers, but curvilinear speed reminded me a little bit of the Gary Gray, more of the Todd Wright stuff, with the kind of moving in some circles and working more in a transverse plane. Could you go over curvilinear speed? I thought the videos you showed in this article were excellent.
Yeah, so the videos were from Michael Zweifel of Building Better Athletes. He was nice enough to share those, or let me use it within the article. And I just think, it's different. Obviously, the force that's going into the ground is on a not completely vertical or horizontal. You have a body lean going on, so it's different in that aspect. And if you watch sport, It's obviously a lot of it's in straight lines and segments, but there's also curves to it. You think of like a basketball player coming off of a screen or something like that. A defensive lineman could take a curvilinear path at times. So it happens quite a bit, and I think it's something that people overlook in terms of training. I know, like even within track, we've started to use it more because obviously our guys run on a curve if they're doing anything above 100 meters, but we have a substantial indoor season, and we don't necessarily want our guys to be running those tight indoor curves at top end speed like all the time to train that curvilinear component. So we've implemented some of those drills within there, just like the wave or serpentine runs, and our guys love those. We do like chasers pretty regular, where it's just like a guy in the middle starts, and then the two guys on each side chase after him. We've started to do that with the curvilinear stuff, and they like it even more. They just like that idea of weaving in and out. It adds, for whatever reason, a little bit more fun component to it, I guess, for them.
Yeah, it looked fun. Can you explain two of the drills that you were just talking about, like that you would, as an example, so people can get a better picture of it? Yeah.
So the chaser, when we do it, where it's just a linear component, there'll be three guys. One guy's in the middle, and that person will start, and then the other two guys will chase after, and whoever out of those three comes in last goes to the middle the next time. So that was actually stolen from Tony Holler. And then, so we've done that probably, I think we're in the 5th week of our season. We've done that maybe 3 times. With the curvilinear component, we just have a partner, and they have like a serpentine run to complete, and there'll be a guy in front and a guy trailing, and the guy in front will start, and if the trailer catches him, then we don't really have like a consequence for that. Like they just get to kind of gloat for a little bit and say, I caught you, or yeah. if the other guy runs away, then he can say, I ran away from you. So
yeah, there you go. Cool. Next up in the pyramid is acceleration, deceleration.
Yeah, so this one I think was probably one of the more simple ones. Obviously, we're within the team sport context. There's going to be some acceleration, deceleration approach, a component to it. But it was, I wanted to include that separately from like the open and close part, just because I think it can, like from the track perspective, like we don't really ever accelerate, decelerate like that. But I still think there's a good training effect just in terms of absorbing force. So it was a way to kind of give that its own section where we can really focus in on just getting up to speed, decelerating, and reaping the benefits of just absorbing that force.
Yeah, and then kind of finishing with the closed and open skills. Can you go over each one?
Yeah, the closed skills would be something pretty simple. Like, so with I should go back with the acceleration, deceleration. I was just dealing mainly with the sagittal plane, but now like the closed skills could be something that opens up also opens up to the transverse and frontal planes. So it could be something like a 5-10-5, where it's like a predetermined path of what the athlete's going to do. And then the open skill would be where they have to react in some way, shape, or form to a stimulus. So more gameplay type specific. So I think there's probably value in both, depending on the level of athlete you're dealing with. But I do think there is something to be said with, I would probably lean more towards the open type skill where the athlete has to react to something and make a decision that way. I just think it's more in line with what they're going to see on the field of play.
Yeah, obviously, though, you're going to, and I think I was talking to Cam about this last week, too, is it sounds like, block and random, right? And then, obviously, but you need to start with some of the closed skills and maybe teach that skill.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. And, again, within the track and field context, there's, I guess, most people would view a lot of what's going on within the track context as a closed skill, like most of it's closed. But I think there's a lot of variability that exists within it that we don't even consider, such as just the different weather conditions and stuff like that. So even though it's like a pretty specific task that we see in track and field, such as long jump, like run and jump as far as you can, there's a lot going on over the course of an approach that people probably don't understand, and definitely makes that more open than closed.
Very cool. Let's just go back to the name of the article was The Death of Football Fast and Track Speed, that you were talking about this stuff. And basically, I guess the whole idea is that you just feel like football fast and track speed just doesn't give the full story of the athlete's ability. That's what you said in the article. Talk to us, expand on why you don't like these terms.
I feel like when someone says track speed, that it just implies that they can only run fast in a linear manner. I think that's at least when I hear that term, that's what pops in my head. So it just kind of pigeonholes that athlete into like, this is all they can do. When, do they have the ability to run on a curve? Can they accelerate and decelerate? How are they in an open environment? How are they in a closed environment? It just doesn't answer that question. Like what are they really capable of doing? So I think we can do better and just be more specific about what an athlete can do. The football fast thing, I think there's a variety of different ways in which that can be interpreted. Like, they move really well with pads on, or, they make maybe the way that they move on the field doesn't necessarily, or it's like better compared to what they have in terms of measurables with speed and stuff like that. So I think, again, we can just do a better job with the terminology that we use and the language we use to describe athletes. So we have a clearer picture. I think that clearer picture can help us communicate with our athletes better. We can identify strengths and weaknesses, focus in on what they're really like. We can extend their strengths and like utilize what they do well a little bit better. We can try to fill in the holes in terms of the weaknesses. And then we can also have better conversations with our colleagues about those athletes.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Coach, let's go into, you wrote an article called In Search of Transfer. And it was basically because of maybe some anger over a tweet. And the tweet was, need to sprint faster? Squat. Need to jump higher? Squat. Need to explode out of a stance? Squat. Need to push off the mound harder? Squat. Basically saying that all they need to do is squat and all their problems are solved. Give us an overview of, because this is a two-part article. Give us an idea why you wrote this, and then some of the things that you kind of found in terms of, because this is the question that this is the search of the golden egg here, in search of transfer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it definitely that article was spawned from some anger. We're all looking for the best way to do things, and to just say that the squat is going to cure all that is kind of crazy. Now, again, I said earlier, with high school athletes, we can give them almost anything and they're going to get better. So, like, I do think that the squat is a viable exercise. Like, kids will, if you have them squat, they'll probably see, not only will their squat improve, but they'll probably get faster. They'll probably be able to jump higher. But like, I just don't think, I just personally would not like to live in that like sort of self-imposed world of absolutes. Like, why don't we have a wide array of tools that we can use and identify what is most specific or best for an individual?
What were some of the things that you found in general, though, from some of these coaches? This was a pretty long article. I thought it was a great one.
Yeah. So I believe I kicked it off with just talking about Franz Bosch, and that was after I had read strength training and coordination, I believe. And just it took me a while to get through that one, and I'd say that like I had to study it. It was like one where I had to find myself like referring to other resources so I could understand some of the content within it, but he's very out of the box, and definitely gets you to question things that you have done. So things that we've taken away from that are just like the single leg type cleans. We found some value in that. We implement that pretty regularly within our programming, not so much where it's loaded, but just the movement in general. We found that to be helpful in terms of helping with gait and, getting to the big toe. Tony Holler's partner in crime with the Track Football Consortium, Chris Corfus, often talks about the importance of getting to the big toe when you're towing off. So that one has been pretty helpful for us. I think from there I went into Cal Dietz and the triphasic training. We found that to be pretty helpful. We do that with our upperclassmen. We have some an eccentric block, an isometric block, and a concentric block, and then we begin to lighten the weight and move the weight a little bit faster. The kids like it. I think it helps with. It's a good sell for multi-sport athletes because we explain how it can improve their change of direction ability. Obviously, when you're making a cut, there's an eccentric component, there's an isometric component, there's a concentric component. So they like that. But then it's kind of changing up as time goes on too, so they don't get bored with it. And then from there, I believe I went into Derek Hansen and. Derek Hansen just seems to be one of the more practical guys in terms of the resources that I read. Like he's definitely on the same wavelength as I am with the importance of sprinting. So I just like the simplicity that he approaches training with, and definitely find value there.
Yeah, Derek's awesome. I'm actually interviewing him today for my other podcast, Stop and Give Me 20.
Cool.
Let's finish up with speaking of transfer. I wanted to talk. You had written an article about 7 things I think high school athletes can do to get better, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just want to specifically talk about the weight room, just to get your philosophy on the weight room and what you feel about strength training and how it can help, or if it cannot help.
We lift in season twice a week. I definitely think that there is value there. It's obviously supplemental to what we do with track, but it definitely has huge value. And right now I think this has sort of been somewhat of it's always something that's in flux with what I'm doing or what we're doing. And, right now I think we're at a point with our younger guys where we're really, really just emphasizing moving well. So when I started, I'm in my 3rd year as an assistant for our boys program. And when I came in, I have a great head coach who kind of just lets me nerd out and research stuff about the weight room and says, okay, if this is what you think's best, like we'll roll with it. And so when we first started, we did like the triphasic component, but with our younger athletes, what we found was like they weren't getting enough repetition to master like the key movements that we wanted. So now what we're doing within the first couple years with them is it's more of a 1x20 approach. It's not like a full like Dr. Yes's like what he lays out in the 1x20 book, but it's just that idea of like these are the key movements we want you to master. We're going to start really basic, and then we're just going to gradually build it up as an individual. So we have kind of a set structure, but I think it's going to allow for us to individualize more as time goes on. And once they show mastery within those movements, then we can decide how we'll handle them as they move on into their junior and senior year. So basically, we just have like your standard movements. We're going to upper body push, upper body pull. We'll squat, we'll deadlift, we'll hinge. And then we try to get some sort of carry in. We try to get something in the transverse plane in. And again, it's just more about movement. I think it's probably a couple months ago, I put out a tweet to just some college strength coaches, and I said, like, what do you want your athletes to be able to do when they walk into your facility as a college athlete? And like the common theme that came back on that was they just want people to be able to move well. Like there was nothing about like we want them to squat 500 pounds. It was just, hey, we really hope that they move well when they get here, and we'll add the strength. And I think that's something with high school coaches. They're just in a rush to get the strength out of kids. It's like the bigger, faster, stronger thing, but they just want kids to like get as big as they can as fast as possible. And I think that's kind of I think that you need to have more of a slow cook approach to it. So that's what we're really trying to do, is just kids to get to do the movements the right way so they're safe with it, and we'll gradually progress them as individuals as they age in our program.
Okay, good stuff. Awesome. Well, Coach, thanks first of all for, again, your contributions on strengthcoach.com and all of your contributions on all of you've been doing a lot of writing on for Simply Faster, Just Fly Sports, etc. Some great you have a great perspective because you're a teacher and coaching at the same time. I think it's such a nice perspective to hear from that. So thanks so much for coming on and sharing some of your thoughts on training.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right, well, that's going to do it for episode 226 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Poirier and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, right now, 30% off already low prices. Big savings over at Perform Better. The next one-day seminars is in Boston on March 17th. Lee Burton, Eric Cressy, Mike Boyle, and Dan John. Check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Rob Assise for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Train Heroic. Head over to trainheroic.com. Start your 14-day trial. Let them know that Anthony sent you. You'll save 25% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro Edition. Thanks to Alan Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Mike Perry and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. Dom Mazzoni and the Superhuman Strength Team. Check them out at superhumanstrength.com. Use the code STRENGTHCOACH and save 10% off your first order. And of course, remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out for 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Renna. Go to continuefit.com to see all of my podcasts, including Strength Coach TV. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.